Now, folks, we have more election reform taking place, and whenever you hear the phrase election reform, you know that we're going to get screwed. One of the best editorial pages out there is Investors Business Daily. I've said this for years, and you really ought to check it out online. And they point out that when President Donald Trump brought up the idea that non-citizens were casting ballots in elections, the reaction was fast and furious. Such a thing, if it exists at all, is exceedingly rare, we are told. But when one state decided to take a close look, it found something quite different. Listen to this. After a year-long voter fraud probe, Texas discovered that, lo and behold, 95,000 people identified as non-citizens had voter registrations. What's more, 58,000 of them voted in one or more Texas elections. 95,000 people identified as non-citizens had voter registrations. 58,000 of them voted in one or more Texas elections. When Attorney General Ken Paxton led the state's investigation, he noted that Texas had already found 165 non-citizens in 4 counties who had cast 100 illegal votes in 2 years. But wait, isn't all this stuff about non-citizens voting a load of bull? When Trump appointed a voter fraud commission in 2017, Democrats and the press howled in protest. Sure, Trump almost certainly exaggerated the number of non-citizen voters, but in response, Time magazine declared that we, quote, know that ineligible non-citizens do not vote in American elections, unquote. Vox.com, the explanatory news site, derided Trump as, quote, indulging the long-standing myth of the non-citizen voter. Harvard researchers said there's no evidence that non-citizens vote. Less than a year after he put it together, Trump disbanded his commission, not because it didn't find anything, but because it faced a fusillade of lawsuits and stonewalling from state election officials. Of course, if you're not looking for evidence of non-citizens voting, you're not likely to find any, right? And it turns out that for the most part, nobody's looking very hard. Because whenever anyone does look, what they find, as Texas did, is plenty of evidence that people who aren't U.S. citizens are casting ballots. After the 2016 elections, Ohio Secretary of State John Husted found 821 non-citizens registered to vote in the state. 126 had voted in 2016 or earlier elections. A 2013 analysis of voter registration by an outside group, not the state government, found 1,046 non-citizens registered in Virginia. A 2011 study found 12,000 non-citizens registered to vote in Colorado, 5,000 of whom did so in the 2010 midterm elections. Amazingly, the entire only citizens can register the vote protection is largely based on the honor system. Even in Texas, the state does not require verification of a voter's statement that they're a citizen. Now, if they're claiming this problem doesn't exist at all, the left says it doesn't matter because it's not widespread. But this is a clever dodge. Election fraud doesn't have to be widespread to be effective. In fact, the very purpose of election fraud is to flip extremely close elections. That doesn't take widespread voter fraud, just carefully targeted efforts. For example, in the 2008 election in Minnesota, the now disgraced Al Franken won by a tiny 312 vote margin. His victory gave Senate Democrats a filibuster-proof majority, which let them pass Obamacare. One study found that non-citizen voting in the election could have decided the outcome. The 2018 midterms featured an unusually large number of races decided by a relative handful of votes. What's more, non-citizens voting is only one of the ways that ballot integrity is being eroded, mainly by efforts on the left to make voting easier. As the Texas Attorney General points out, there are also concerns about mail-in ballot application fraud, unlawful influencing of voters, and unlawful mail ballot collection by voter harvesters. God almighty, I tell you. What explains Democrats' indifference to these kinds of voter fraud? Aren't they always chanting about how every vote counts? Well, every fraudulent ballot cancels out a legitimate one. So the threshold for dealing with voter fraud can't be when it's widespread. Everyone should have zero tolerance. Now, the most likely explanation for Democrats' indifference is that they benefit from sloppy enforcement of election laws. Now, the editorial page recently pointed out that several House elections in California could have flipped from red to blue thanks to these sorts of fraudulent efforts. And California election officials seem clueless or utterly indifferent to whether non-citizens are voting in state elections. I actually think it's worse. I think they like it. I think they like it. And anytime you try and tighten up these laws, they say, you must be a racist. You're trying to suppress the vote. You're, the same crapola. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.